Hello and welcome to New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones and we're so glad to have you here. Today we are all business. Our guests represent business and industry in the Garden State and they are advocate for businesses of all sizes. Chrissy Buteas is with the New Jersey Business and Industry Association and she's going to be talking about the challenges local businesses are facing now that marijuana has been legalized. First, Tom Bracken of the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce is standing by. Tom Bracken is president and CEO of the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce. He's here now to talk about the relationship between government and business in the Garden State. Tom, welcome. It's so good to see you.
I'm very happy to be here, Laura. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah, and it's funny, like we have known each other. You've been a part of the Chamber of Commerce for over 10 years, and before that, very active in the financial community. We met each other back in Trenton, back in the days of the Core State bike race. So it's good to have you on.
Long time ago, Laura, but we don't look that old, do we?
No, amazingly, we don't. We don't.
We don't age.
All right, yeah. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about business in New Jersey. So, Tom, the Renewed Jersey Business Summit, that recently took place in Atlantic City. So I wanted to talk about how significant it was for the business community to have it in person, face-to-face session after years of pandemic restrictions.
Laura, it was, I've been in the business community of New Jersey for 52 years. I don't recall a business event of that stature in any of those 52 years that equaled that stature. When we put this together, we knew that people were tired, they wanted to change, they wanted to move forward, they wanted to get out, they wanted to network. We knew all those dynamics were in place. And so we put the event together and we thought we'd get between 350 and 400 participants. We ended up with nearly 700 people showing up in Atlantic City.
Wow.
We had the governor do a keynote speak at the end of the first day. We had the legislative leaders in a panel the second day. We had 4 other panels that touched on significant topics impacting business. And the audience was very engaged. We encouraged the audience to ask questions of the panelists in each of the panels. There were many questions. We had to cut them off because we had a 1-hour time constraint on each panel. It was an extremely interactive session. A lot of things got put on the table. We also had a business expo with 56 companies exhibiting. We could have had, if we had space, we could have probably had 100. And the networking that took place at that event was just spectacular. So it was an event that grossly exceeded our expectations and something that we will almost definitely have next year.
Yeah. Now, in the days following the event, you publicly walked back some of your criticism of the Murphy administration's business agenda. So what was it that prompted you to adjust some of your language?
A couple of people came up to me and said, great presentation, great event and so forth, but is it really as bad as you said? And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And they told me what I said. And so, in the heat of the battle, when you're making your presentations, a lot of times, you break from script and you say, whatever you say. So I went back and I reviewed the tape and saw what I said, and it really didn't reflect what I meant to say. So because people had asked me about it, obviously if they thought that it was an aggressive statement, how many other people did? So I decided to correct it and correct it for the record to really reflect the way I felt.
Well, the summit produced a list of recommendations across a range of topics from the state's economic climate to infrastructure to health. And more broadly, you stated the governor may have made New Jersey's economy fairer, but not necessarily stronger. So of the several recommendations that emerged from the summit, what 2 to 3 would you prioritize today to bring us closer to being stronger?
Well, let me first say that my comment was, I think he's on the equation of fair and stronger. The fair has gotten a lot more attention. And I said to him as he left the stage after the keynote, I would venture to say that in my estimation, we might have the fairest economy in the country. But the stronger issue is where we need help. And I offered our help that we would love to have not only it be a stronger economy, but the strongest economy. And there were ways to do that. Probably first and foremost, to answer your question, Laura, the first thing we can do to make things better is to have more ongoing, regularly scheduled communication with the governor's office and the legislature. You can't really correct and work on the issues impacting business unless you first sit and talk about them. You have to understand, both sides have to understand each side's position on topics. And if you don't talk about them, it's going to just happen back and forth in the press, which never is productive. So number one, we need to have more ongoing constructive dialogue. And we proposed that several times during the session. And Assemblyman Greenwald raised his hand and said he would do that. So we're in the process of trying to schedule our first meeting there. So that dialogue is key. Secondly, I think in the immediate term, to get the business community back on a track of recovery, there's two primary things that we would ask for. One is, now that the governor is sitting on between $3 and $4 billion of American Rescue Plan money, and maybe growing to $6 billion plus because of the strength of the revenues coming in, use some of that money to help the business community. Number one, don't make the business community replenish the unemployment trust fund with their funds. Use the money to replenish the unemployment trust fund. Therefore taking $1.2 billion off the back of the business community. 36 states around the country have done that, and it has been very impactful positively for those states. The second thing is the business community still has financial difficulties. There's no federal programs left. The business community is suffering from inflation. They're suffering from lack of people. They're struggling to make ends meet. They need help. And the state EDA has, over time, come up with $800 million in grants for business. But that's a great start, but it is only a start. We need a lot more money from the American Rescue Plan to pump into the business community to get them over the hump and back on the road to recovery. Because if we don't recover our business community right now, when this is a once in a lifetime opportunity because of the money we got from the federal government, shame on us.
Yeah, well, when we envision the struggles with inflation and affordability, people typically do so from the point of view of individuals and families, but these issues are affecting the business community as well. So could you go a little bit deeper and provide a sense of your members' experience within the current climate?
Regarding inflation?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, inflation, the basic driver of inflation is demand for goods versus supply of goods. So when people demand product and there's a shortage of it, the price of the products that are available goes up. So therein lies the dilemma for a lot of businesses, which is the supply chain issue. They don't have the opportunity to get the supplies they need. And if you don't have those needed supplies and you sold them at your normal price, your revenues are going to be down. Simple math. And you have an overhead to cover. So can you survive on less revenue if you keep your prices low? So you have to adjust to that dynamic if you're going to survive. So that's one thing that is dramatically impacting the business community right now. And until they get the supply chain issue under control, it's going to stay that way. Now, the other thing that might aggravate that a little bit in the short term is the Federal Reserve has increased and is looking to increase rates even more aggressively. That is supposed to reduce inflation. But in the short term, it causes companies that are borrowing money to pay more. So it, again, eats into the profit, places more pressure on the revenue and the bottom line issues that are impacting them. So it's like this wheel that keeps on spinning, and it all goes back to the supply chain. That's the primary cause of this. You can add back into that the fact that they can't find labor and they have to cut back on their hours. Sometimes they have to cut back on days. It all impacts revenue, which eventually hits their bottom line negatively.
Yeah, I don't think there's a business you walk by where you don't see that help wanted sign.
Correct.
Yeah, and so with respect to Governor Murphy's proposed budget, it's a $48.9 billion budget. The business community has stated they've got some concerns such as insufficient funds to assist small businesses and a failure to extend property tax relief to business owners. So what kind of alternatives will the Chamber of Commerce be promoting and talking about as they make their way through the budget season?
Well, two of the ones that I talked about, the two of the ones I just mentioned, we're asking for in the budget process for unemployment insurance fund relief and also working capital money. Other than that, we would like to see more money allocated to childcare. Childcare is a huge issue. It is preventing people from going back to work because they either can't find open childcare slots or they can't afford it. So the childcare industry needs assistance so that they can open more of the childcare centers, hire more people to be able to take more children. And in the case of people who can't afford it, maybe give tax credit relief to those people so they can afford to send their children to childcare. That's another issue that needs to be addressed. Another issue that is very prominent is workforce development. There are a lot of people out of work and there are a lot of job openings, which kind of looks like an oxymoron, really. I mean, it's a dilemma. The problem is a lot of the new jobs that are opening are open, the people aren't trained for. So they need to get trained to be able to take on these jobs. And if they were trained, they probably would take on these jobs. But money is needed to provide that workforce training. And it's needed very, very quickly because the jobs are, the longer they are open, the less likely the business is able to survive. So workforce development, childcare, unemployment trust fund replenishment, working capital to help all these dilemmas. The working capital, one thing it also helps, Laura, is one of many issues needed to be corrected to get people back to work is pay people more money.
One time for one other question, and it's the walk to Washington. And for viewers who may not be familiar, you used to charter an Amtrak train, and it was a walk to Washington because you're walking along the trains. So where business owners, where people, all types of people would have access to be able to meet with their elected officials and go down and speak to their congressional representatives. Will that be returning? And what factors are going into making that decision? I know I've been on many a walk to Washington, and those are wonderful trips.
Well, the reason they were canceled was because of COVID. Right. There's no way you were going to get 600, 700, 800 people on a train for 4 hours in COVID.
Well, because they all congregate to usually one car.
That's like a lot of times that's the case. But
yeah, right.
The whole purpose of the train is face-to-face, close quarter contact, so you could talk to people. And that is exactly the opposite of what you wanted in COVID. So that's why it didn't work. So we couldn't find a way to make the train work safely, and we decided not to do it. Now, with the advent of our new business summit, which is wonderful, and as I said, we're almost definitely going to have it again next year, maybe even bigger and better. We have to find a way to factor in our walk to Washington. We're dealing with that right now. There's a lot of scheduling. There's a lot of manpower required to do both. We have to deal with all that. So we have to figure out how and if we're going to do both, or what we're going to do. But that will be a discussion for another day.
All right, so we will stay tuned on updates for the walk to Washington, but the summit, a tremendous success.
Stay tuned.
All right, well, Tom Bracken, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. It was good seeing you.
Wonderful of you to ask me, Laura. It was nice seeing you again. Yeah. And I wish you all the best.
Well, same to you. Thank you.
Bye.
Chrissy Buteas is Chief Government Affairs Officer of the New Jersey Business and Industry Association. It is the nation's largest state-level business association, and they represent companies that employ nearly 1 million people in New Jersey. Chrissy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's good to have you here. The Murphy administration has received some criticism for the pace and nature of the rollout of legalized cannabis. From the standpoint of the constituents in the business community, how would you rate the state's performance? Where do they need to improve?
Well, great question. The business community has been very involved with the Murphy administration as well as the Cannabis Review Commission, specifically related to the workplace safety requirements and what is going to be expected of the business community to comply with the legalization of marijuana and how it should be treated in the workplace. We're currently waiting for the regulations to come out so that we have the proper guidance for our business community.
Well, that kind of led me into my next question as we get into the weeds. Yes, a pun intended there. NJBIA has urged the New Jersey Cannabis Regulatory Commission to provide that guidance to businesses on workplace safety, and the commission has yet to introduce these standards for training and for the certification of workplace impairment recognition expert, or these WIRES as it's known, to access an employee's impairment from marijuana. So can you explain a little bit more about why this is such a priority for your members and why it's so complicated? We're moving from a zero tolerance environment one day to a murkier climate the next.
Well, safety is the name of the game here for the business community, for our employers, for our employees as well. And so with the legalization of cannabis came this provision that requires our companies they can maintain a drug-free workplace, which is critical to us. However, they also have to hire these workplace impairment experts right now that are basically folks that are trained to be able to determine if someone is in fact impaired on the job. The challenge is that we have no regulations around what this is going to look like, how the training is going to be conducted, who's doing all of the training, and what is going to be the process for all of these companies who have a drug-free workplace. How are they going to be able to comply with this statute moving forward?
How has the commission responded to your calls from NJBIA?
The commission has certainly received correspondence from us and has heard of our concerns. And we are now waiting to see if the next round of regulations will in fact address this critical component for the business community.
Yeah, when we talk about workplace safety and implications on workforce trends, what are some of the challenges the labor market is going to need to address now that we have legalized cannabis?
So again, legalized cannabis, anyone's permitted to do this on their own time. However, when you are on the job site, you are not permitted to be impaired if that is obviously the policy of that particular company. And so that should be maintained. The challenge that we're having, as I was mentioning before, is that there is no standard testing for cannabis that's really able to determine if you are in fact under the influence right now, like there is an alcohol test to see if you are in fact under the influence. And so the statute has called for these WIRES, they're called, to determine if that employee is in fact impaired on the job. So we want to make sure that our employers are following the rule of the law. And if in fact they see an employee who is impaired and could be jeopardizing their safety as well as the safety of their fellow coworkers, that they have that proper trained individual to determine if in fact they are impaired on the job. Now, how all of this works is where we are trying to gain more of an understanding. We want to also know who is going to be training all of these WIRES. What is the expectation of them? Obviously going to be another added cost for the business community as well, to have these individuals either on site or whether they can do so virtually or not. Again, these are all of the questions that we have, and trying to provide guidance because we're really in a gray area right now, and certainly predictability and maintaining that safe work environment is very, very critical to what we do. Keeping in mind, we all are very focused on keeping our employees safe, and we have a lot of our business community that has some really, really dangerous functions that they serve, whether it's working on high tension wires or on gas mains. So it's really critical that any employee is not under the influence of any substance whatsoever. And right now we're trying to get that guidance on how cannabis will be, in fact, looked at moving forward.
Right. Looking at those monitors, those wires, as they're called. Now, certainly members, your members have raised the issues about how this is going to affect their operations, but what might surprise the general public, they might not be thinking about this. They're thinking more in broad strokes as opposed to considering the day-to-day impact on businesses and so many small businesses that are the backbone of New Jersey.
Again, another added component to the business community that they have to comply with in the state. There's no other state in the nation that requires these wires to be utilized to determine if an employee is impaired on the job site. So it's certainly going to be another added step that the business community needs to comply with. We have obviously spoken about our concerns with moving in this direction. It is now law. And so we just want to make sure that everyone's able to be in compliance with that law moving forward. So having the regulations out will at least provide us a bit more clarity on what is exactly expected to comply with the law. But we also have to make sure that we have these wires trained and accessible for the employer community to use. And as I was mentioning, who's going to be doing the training? What do they need to be trained in? What is the cost going to be? Whether they're on site, off site, all of these clarifications still need to be determined.
Okay, you're bringing up cost. So several studies have been conducted to measure the financial benefits of legalized cannabis in New Jersey. Revenue estimates for the state hit a wide range, some reaching as high as $1 billion a year. Governor Murphy's proposed budget, I believe, has it far less, more around $19 million in tax revenue. Does NJBIA have a position on where New Jersey should direct any additional funds? For example, there are other states with legalized marijuana, like Colorado. They channel a portion of revenues to support schools.
I think there are a number of different areas that the Murphy administration can certainly use these funds, and I believe some of them are already dedicated in the statute as well. And so, additional funds coming into the state is certainly a good thing. I know from the business community's perspective, we are looking forward to working with our new businesses that have started it in this industry. There's clearly going to be a benefit to getting this legalized in some respects. But again, we're really focused on that workplace provision. That's really key.
Right. And as we're heading into budget season, pivoting just a little bit away from cannabis, New Jersey Business Industry Association recently released its annual regional business climate analysis, and it ranks New Jersey as the least competitive region for the 4th year straight. And the region includes Pennsylvania, New York, Delaware, Maryland, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. So as we're heading into the budget negotiation season, what priorities will NJBIA look to advance and to address questions around economic competitiveness?
The economic health of the state is really, really important. Right now, we're actually dealing with a workforce crisis on our hands. I don't think anyone can go out and see a business without a help wanted sign. So we want to make sure that our employees are coming, back to work, that our businesses are able to have the personnel to do their jobs effectively and efficiently. So that's really critical, focusing on that workforce development component. Also infrastructure, all infrastructure investment brings back more funding, more revenue to the state years down the road. And so when we have these federal funds that still need to be allocated and spent on the recovery of our state, we're hoping that they're going to be put towards some transformative projects that are so needed related to the state's infrastructure. And of course, the unemployment insurance fund. And I think everyone has heard us talk about this. pretty repeatedly at this point in time. But, at no fault of theirs, the business community had to shut down during COVID. And what that did was deplete the unemployment trust fund. And so the state had to borrow funds from the federal government to then pay unemployment claims. Right now, where we stand is that nearly $1 billion in a federal loan needs to be replaced. And what we're hoping the state will do, as some other states have done, is to help replenish the unemployment trust fund by using those federal dollars. And again, this will help the business community because this is a tax on jobs. And we want to make sure that our business community has already, had some real challenges during COVID, is able to move forward and put those funds that would be paid to this unemployment trust fund into reinvesting in their employees and other needs.
Yeah, well, it is certainly not easy to open and run a business in New Jersey, and especially with so many new changes on the horizon and so many unknowns with the legalization of cannabis. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us a little bit about where we are in the process, and hope that you come back on once we learn a little bit more and get a little bit more clarity about specifically, cannabis in the workforce. And we hope to have you back on again.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.
And that will do it for today. Thank you so much for watching New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones, and we look forward to seeing you back next time.